Between a rock and a hard place. Oh, is my mic on? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. That's where Aaron Ralston, a mountaineer and avid adventurer, found himself in April 2003. He was hiking in a remote area of Utah's Canyonlands National Park, and while descending into a slot canyon, an 800-pound boulder was dislodged. He fell into the canyon, and just before he reached the bottom, his right hand became wedged between the boulder and the canyon wall. He was 26 years old, a mechanical engineer with a degree from Carnegie Mellon, and a thirst for adventure. But over the course of 127 hours that he was stuck in that canyon, his thirst became a little more desperate. He was a very resourceful person. He spread out the contents of his backpack on top of the boulder with his one free hand. He rigged up his climbing harness so that he could rest, and he rationed what little food and water he had. His first tactic was to try chipping away at the boulder with his dull pocket knife. He was frustrated with himself for having grabbed the cheap knife as he ran out the door of his apartment rather than searching around for his nicer one. When the chipping didn't work, he pulled with all of his might, trying to budge the boulder even a little bit. No luck. He went through an incredible emotional transformation during those 5 days that he was stuck in the canyon, capturing it all with his pocket-sized video camera. He recorded messages to his family and friends. He talked to himself. He made fun of himself. He blamed himself. He gave himself pep talks. And finally, on day 5, he amputated his own arm. Now, I won't go into the details of that, or you might start walking out those doors, but you can imagine the state that he was in when he stumbled out of the canyon. After rappelling down a 65-foot sheer cliff and hiking a little ways back towards his car, he was found by a family out hiking who ran for help. He survived to tell the story. Luckily, his video recordings did not have to do that for him. As Daniel said 2 Sundays ago when he shared the story of a man who was on the flight that crash-landed in the Hudson River, we have something to learn from the story of a man who has faced a near-death experience. And I think we have something to learn from Aaron Ralston. The circumstances around how Ralston got there in the first place were kind of shocking to me. He knew the area well, and he knew exactly where he was, but he hadn't told anybody that where he was going, and so they wouldn't even know to look for him. To be honest, when I learned about this story, I thought, I would never do something that stupid. I also thought about my brother, Richard, who actually has a striking resemblance to Ralston and who is a climber himself. And so when I found out that this was a story that I would be preaching on, I immediately called my brother and asked him, have you climbed there? He has, nearby, but not in that particular canyon. And his experience was much luckier. Now, while most of us in this room will probably never experience something quite as extreme as Ralston did, we do have times in our lives when we feel stuck. There's no good or easy way out. We're between a rock and a hard place, like Odysseus or like Aaron Ralston. It might be a physical challenge. You've walked or hiked so far away from your starting point and are utterly exhausted or injured. You're up a creek without a paddle, as the saying goes, and yet you must get back. Or it might be the diagnosis of some illness, such as cancer, which calls you to make a major life change and perhaps pursue aggressive treatment without the guarantee of survival. You might find yourself stuck in a relationship or a job, or stuck out of a job with no prospects on the horizon. Maybe you found yourself stuck in a situation where you're being asked to compromise your most deeply held principles and values, or else bear some negative consequences. I'm sure you could add to this list. My questions for you are, how do you cope with these situations? How do you get yourself out of them? And what do you have to sacrifice? At first, Ralston did what many of us would probably do in his situation. He panicked. He started chipping away at the boulder and tried to wrestle it down, and he did not succeed. He screamed his head off for help, hoping that some nearby hiker might hear him. But then he paused to catch his breath and told himself, "Aaron, do not lose it." He prayed. He asked God to keep him true to himself and not to give up. And he made fun of himself for being the hero who goes out into the desert alone without telling anyone where he's going. From panic, he descended into despair. He said that even from the second day, he knew he was going to die. He realized that he might have to cut his arm off to get free, but he really, really didn't want to do it. And he didn't think that he had the tools to do so either. He said that he knew he would die, but that it wasn't he had given up. He felt there was nothing more he could do. It wasn't up to him. And this brought him, eventually, a profound sense of peace. He was facing his own mortality. This belief that there is no other way out other than death seemed quite poignant to me this week with the news of the suicide of Robin Williams. He is one high-profile representative of many people in our society who struggle with depression and addiction, feel stuck, and see no other way out than to take their own life. But Ralston wasn't quite at that point. Throughout his time in the canyon, he recorded videos of himself. Most of these were messages to family and friends, what would be left behind after his death. "Bring love and peace and happiness and beautiful lives into the world in my honor," he said to them, "because it would bestow the greatest meaning for me." He realized as he was filming, however, that even the thought of his loved ones brought a smile to his face. Whenever the pain got bad, he would start thinking about them, and his smile would come back. On day 5, delusional from lack of food and water, he had a vision. It's the vision from our second reading of himself with one arm, playing with a little boy who he believed was his future son. And he knew then that he would not die in the canyon. That vision of himself in the future helped to keep him and his hope alive. Over the course of those 5 days, Ralston went through an evolution from panic to despair to peace to hope. In retrospect, he says that the boulder was a blessing because it forced him to see clearly what was most important to him. It gives a whole new meaning to the idea that God is my rock and savior. The videos that he was recording as his legacy were not about his achievements or regrets in life, but about the relationships that he had and the gifts that they had given him. Gratitude for these made him smile. So how did Ralston find the hope and the courage to do what he needed to do to get free? I think that the answer is fourfold. First, he had to believe in his own strength and to draw from deep within himself. Now, I must admit that if I had found myself in his situation, I don't think I would have believed in myself enough to follow through with an amputation. But perhaps we don't realize the strength that we have until it is tested by situations like this. Getting unstuck requires believing that we are strong enough to physically endure, to pursue treatment, to work hard, to speak up, whatever it may be. And second, Ralston found the will to live through the will to love. Thinking about the people most important to him and the joy that they bring to him buoyed his spirits. Lao Tzu, the Taoist philosopher, wrote, "Being loved by someone gives you strength. while loving someone deeply gives you courage. I think it was so for Ralston. When we find ourselves stuck between two undesirable choices, the relationships in our lives can help sustain us. They don't even have to be physically present, but simply the thought of them, the reminder that we are part of a family, a community, and an interdependent web, can be enough to give us hope, knowing that we are not in this alone. Third, Ralston had a vision of the future. He was able to imagine himself alive, out of the canyon, with one hand having brought a beautiful child into the world. It's hard to move forward from difficult situations when we can't imagine what is next, when we're so mired in what is that we can't see what might be, and how our life may be changed by the experience. As one person said in the video discussion earlier this week, I can get through any stuck situation at work with that carrot, the paycheck, or the end of that project hanging in view. And sometimes it is our family and our friends who lend us their eyes and imaginations so that together we may envision a way out. And fourth, for Ralston, the blessed boulder, as he called it, required him to make a painful choice. He had a vision of himself in the future, but how on earth was he going to make that vision a reality? He had to ask himself, what am I willing to sacrifice to get unstuck? For what will I make that sacrifice? And when is the right time? These are questions that our religious ancestors have faced before us. What would they sacrifice to speak their truth and to live their faith freely? Now, Ralston began his book with the passage from Homer's Odyssey, which you heard as a reading today as well, because Odysseus faced this same dilemma. When passing in this channel between Scylla and Charybdis, would he sacrifice 6 men on the rocks, or the entire ship and crew in the whirlpool? He chose to sacrifice 6 men. Ralston chose to sacrifice his arm. He did so without the guarantee of survival, for the sake of life and love and family. And he did so after 127 hours in the canyon. Not on the 2nd day, but on the 5th day, a Saturday. And as one of you pointed out to me, if he hadn't cut his arm off on that day at that time, he may have never been found by other hikers and made it out of there alive. Sometimes in our lives, getting unstuck requires sacrificing ego or always being right, the expectations that we have of the future, money, control, or comfort. Aaron Ralston's story not only raises questions for us about what we would do, but it also exemplifies some deep human emotional processes that many of us go through when we find ourselves stuck and riding a roller coaster of despair and hope. His story also suggests some ways that we might tap into the help that we need. So may all of us find the strength, the hope, and the courage to navigate the choppy waters and the slot canyons of life, drawing on the web of relationships of which we are a part. And may the boulders in our lives turn to blessings.